Hi, Jesse.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
Okay, good. Very nice to meet you.
Yeah, okay. No, no, nice to meet you as well. Thank you very much for speaking at our webinar.
It's my pleasure. So, would you like me to start, or would you like to give me some kind of introduction?
Yeah. What I will do is I'll give a short introduction and then I'll introduce you to the audience, and then it's all yours.
Okay,
So
so
it
the
will be
audience
just
is on a separate thing where we're
yeah.
broadcasting. Okay,
So it will be just about a 2-minute introduction.
okay, and then no, and then I won't be able to receive questions or feedback from them. So I guess I'll have to have you. If they have a question, that you'll have to let me
Uh,
know.
Yeah, or else people can put their questions in the chat box as and when they have it.
Oh,
You can
okay,
keep
so
an
they'll
eye
be
for
able
it.
to
Yeah.
okay ask questions over Zoom. Good. All right, good. Well, I'm ready whenever you are.
So just give me 1 minute.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. So looks like we have got okay. So people are still joining in. Just give me 1 minute, Jesse.
Sure.
Okay, I think we can get started. So, Jesse, thank you very much for accommodating our request and coming and talking in the first webinar of 2021. So overall, this is our sixth webinar. We started last summer, and it's been getting some good traction. So you happen to be the first person for this year. Thank you once again for the talk, and welcome everybody for today's presentation, where Jesse is going to talk about how do you build data and analytics teams, which includes the data science, data engineering, data analysis, and everything what those teams do, and how do you get the best out of those teams. Once again, thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions during this presentation from Jesse, please post your questions in the chat box, and Jesse would be glad to have a look at that at regular points in time. If not, at the end of the call, he will definitely answer it. So Jesse, thank you very much for your time, and the floor is all yours. So you can go ahead and start presenting. So I've enabled the sharing option.
Excellent. Don't need sharing. It's just my video. So if you can just full screen my video. Well, excellent. So thank you again, everybody, for attending this webinar. I really appreciate you taking the time to spend this with me. Um, One thing I'd like to do is to ask you to get to know you all just a little bit better, since we're doing this virtually. If you could just put in the chat, are you a manager, individual contributor, so I can kind of see where you're coming from and perhaps the problems that you're dealing with in your team. So as you just mentioned, I'm very open to questions. I'm trying to make this as beneficial and interactive for you as possible. So with that, please put whether you're a manager or individual contributor in the chat. And this, of course, is Foundations of Data Teams. So let's talk about our itinerary for the next few minutes. We're going to be talking about houses. We're going to be talking about houses as a metaphor for the value that we create as data teams, and what needs to happen in order for us to actually be able to use data to create the maximum amount of value from our data. We're going to talk about disclosure, and we'll talk about the data teams themselves and then some of the implications of this. So to start off with, we have our desires. As I look at this picture, I think oh my goodness, how can I live there? Okay. You're thinking maybe you've already chosen a house on that hillside that would overlook the ocean. It would be absolutely beautiful. I'm looking at that pink one right in the middle, just above the W in width. That's the one I'm going to live on because it looks like they have this beautiful patio. Well, I'm implicit. By that, I mean I'm implicit in the fact that I am not thinking, I wonder if that house is well built enough so that it doesn't slide down that hillside and fall in the ocean, or that I'm asleep and that it doesn't come crashing down on me. We're implicit. We implicitly say, I want a house that doesn't crumble. So instead of having to explicitly say this, you just think, oh, I would love to live in that house. So a lot of times what we are is we're actually not focused. We're actually focused on the exterior, the cosmetic things, what we can see, what we can hear, instead of we're not focused on those those implicit things of here's what I'd like to have here. I want to have this. I want to have that. I don't want it to kill me, for example. So here in this talk, we're going to focus on our houses as a way of dealing with the value created. So our house is the value that a data team creates, the value that we create with data, the insight, the report, the analytic, that sort of thing. And then we have our construction. So who is going to construct this house that we live in, that we create the value in? This is our data teams. So as I look over the chat, I see that many of you are managers. Some of you are individual contributors. So welcome. I think both managers and individual contributors will get to see this. What I often found is that the individual contributors are seeing this, trying to figure out ways to tell their manager about this. And kudos to you managers thinking about, how do I improve this? So here, let's take a look at this picture. If you're not familiar with how movies are shot on with facades, what are called facades. And here's an example. So if you look at this, if you had a camera just focused on that door, that would look like a regular building. But we're so focused on that facade in the movie that we're missing the rest of it. Here, as you look behind it, you can see it's just held up by some scaffolding. There's some boards that are nailed in there to hold it up. Could you live there? No. There's absolutely no way you could live there because it's just a facade. It's just this outside with nothing, exterior with nothing in it. So this was what often happens in organizations I've seen, is that the teams, the managers, maybe even CXOs are so focused on models that they're missing the rest of the structure. There's no way that the people could actually live there because we're focused on that model, but that model is just the facade. It's an important facade, don't get me wrong, but it's a facade on top of the rest of the structure. And we're missing the rest of the structure. We're like these movies. We can't get past that. We have to build this foundation. So maybe what you're thinking there is, okay, I'll give Jesse that. Models, we need some more, but maybe not as much. So let's think about this. This is a common question I get from managers especially. And what they say is, do our teams need foundations? Well, this picture is what's called a yurt. That's the type of building. What I found interesting about yurts is they don't need a foundation. They're actually for nomadic peoples. Nomadic peoples means that they may not move around as much anymore, but at that time when they were really using these yurts, they would just pick it up, take it down, pick it up, move to another place. They didn't need a solid foundation. So if you look there's that yurt is on the ground. There's no concrete, there's no rock below it. And here's the thing. So if we have a house that you don't want to stand for a long time, you don't need a foundation for it. So the question is, do data teams need to be around for a long time? And the answer is yes. Data teams need to be around for the entire life cycle of that. It's not just, hey, we have some data scientists and maybe we have a data engineer that comes on for a contract for a month. No, this is continuous. This is long-standing. And as a direct result, when we create our data teams, we absolutely have to make sure that our data teams are actually are permanent. They're a foundation. They need a foundation to be permanent. So that brings us to a question that I often get from management as well. Hey, I want to put a model in production. I want to do some data science. This is easy, right? I just we're doing analytics already. We're doing simple analytics. I can just slap on data science on top of that. Well, the question is it an easy renovation? Well, no, it's not. Uh, as we can see here, these people are fixing a facade, the outside of a house. And maybe somebody thought, oh, they just can do something, they can throw some plaster up and we're all good. That isn't the case. Even just fixing things, fixing simple things requires a team. There's 5 people all there getting ready to fix this. So adding in advanced analytics such as data science, it isn't a simple renovation. Actually, we need to put a lot more things in place. We need more people. We need more teams. We need more software. We need more technology. We need more things than just, hey, I want to put that model in production. So this is really one of the things I want you to take out of this is what exactly does this imply and what does this mean? So let's talk about disclosure. So if you've ever bought a house, I know in the US, when you buy a house, the seller is often required to disclose things. In other countries, they may or may not be. So when we're selling things, especially a house, the seller, at least in the state of Nevada where I live, has to disclose any problems. And if you look there in the background of that picture, you can actually see the form that's being used. The form says, do you have a problem with this? Do you have a problem with that? And so these non-disclosures, not telling people a problem or lying about the absence of a problem actually has legal and monetary implications for people. They can be sued. There can be a lot of problems. And in a very similar way, we have to have disclosure within our data teams. So I'll ask this question: whose job is it to disclose issues on your team? Go ahead and put your opinion in the chat there. Is it the vendor's job to tell you that there is a problem in your team? Is it management's job? Is it an individual contributor's job? Is it a book's job? What do you think? Go ahead and put that in the chat. Whose job is it to disclose that there's a problem with your house, the value creation, or with your team, your data teams? So somebody says the team's job. Somebody says it's the individual contributor's job. What do other people think? Manager's job? Everyone's job? That one's a pretty good one. So here's the thing. If it's everybody's job, it's nobody's job. And that's a common issue. So what can happen in these sorts of situations is, yeah, you may have a problem. You may have a really big problem with your disclosures. Nobody's disclosed, nobody's told you. And so what can happen is, do you think your vendor is going to tell you? Well, your vendor is not going to tell you because that makes them lose sales. Yeah, it's unfortunate. I used to work for a vendor. And what the vendor will not do is they'll say, hey, you know that software that you're trying to use? Your team is actually not really able to use that. That's how they lose the sale. And they're not going to tell you that. So it's definitely not vendors. I wouldn't expect your vendor to do that. Management. Hey, there may be an unknown for the management team. I find that pretty consistently. The managers, especially C-level people, they've had this data science theme beaten down or drummed into their minds, but nobody's ever said to them, hey, you actually need some more things. You actually need to do this and that. So there is a substantial part of that. Then we have individual contributors. I saw some of you said individual contributors. Hey, that's a difficult thing. That can be a difficult thing for an individual contributor to push upwards. That's what you have to do. And it's not easy, quite frankly. If you are an individual contributor on your team, you're going to have to push upward. You're going to have to convince your manager, that convinces their manager, that eventually bubbles up until somebody says, yeah, let's do this. Or there's books. Hey, most books honestly don't disclose this. They don't tell you. They usually give a really They either don't talk about it at all, don't mention it, or give a rosy view of, saw one book saying, hey, this can be done in a month. Not true. So it is really important that you look for whose job it is. So the question comes up, so is it easy? So sometimes you'll actually see this in a vendor's talk. Hey, our stuff is easy. Don't need that team. We actually make it so easy. You don't need data scientists. You don't need data engineers. Easy. So I would say these sorts of vendors actually go to the opposite direction, where some people omit it, don't say it, and some actually go the opposite and actually tell you it's easy. And they say you don't need that solid foundation. And it's really misleading, quite frankly. They're very misleading in these disclosures, and they're telling you, hey, they're not actually right, that you can do this. And that's not true at all. So now let's talk about the data teams themselves. So as he said during the intro, there are 3 different teams that we need. So they form a triangle. And the reason I use a triangle is it's to show that each one of these teams is equally important. So probably in many of your interactions, webinars, what you've read, you've learned about the data science team. We've really hammered that data science thing home. And that makes people think that data science is the only thing that you need and the only thing that you actually have to use or have. And that's not true at all. We actually need all 3 of these teams. We need data engineering, we need operations, and we need data science. So each one of these different teams is equally important and brings some amount of value to this equation. So that question of, so what do they bring to the equation? Let's take a look at that with each one of these teams. So without data science, well, there's a foundation, but no one lives there. No one could actually live there. So we see that here in this picture. Hey, this building is not crumbling. It's not great, but it's not crumbling. Somebody could live there if they really wanted to. They could fix it up. But here's the issue. No value is going to be created. No person would probably live there. Nobody would probably pay to live there. And this is exactly what happens when companies are missing this data science, that the amount of value being created by their data is very minimal. No one can live there metaphorically. The business does not live there. The business does not gains limited amounts of value from there. So I go so far as to say, data science is really the cherry on top of a lot of work. So if you're going to go through the effort of, let's say, putting data engineering in place, having operations, and you don't have data science in there, you're only gaining a minimal amount of value out of this. You could be gaining so much more. Where that BI team is, yeah, you may have a BI team, but they're limited in what they can do. If you're going to gain the maximum amount of value, you do need that data science team. And I would go so far as to say, hey, if you don't have that data science team and you have those data engineers, why are you doing it? You should be really looking at, how do we get that data science team? How do we get that value creation in place? We want there to be so much value there that the business can actually live there. So this picture, we would change that to being something that somebody really wants to live there. It's this beautiful apartment or beautiful house. So let's talk about what happens when there aren't any data engineers, when there's no data engineering team. And this is exactly what that looks like. I have a lot of experience on this. The companies who bought into, we only need data and science. This is what their infrastructure, this is what what they're doing looks like. Their technical stack looks like this. Yeah, we built a house there. The business could at one point got some value, but then you can see it's crumbling. And yeah, they built that house, but it crumbled. There was a lack of sound engineering behind this house. As you can see, hey, the roof didn't cave in, but somebody didn't really look at the sheer grade of that cliff. And so that house is crumbling down because that cliff is giving way. Somebody didn't do the engineering right on this house. And this is exactly what it looks like in the real world when I come and I work with a team or an organization that doesn't have any data engineers. I come in, I look, and the sheer amount of technical debt has weighed down the team so much that they can go nowhere. They are not able to create anything. So you when you look at this house, you don't think, hey, we should build a third story on that. In other words, metaphorically, hey, let's add some more metals on there. There's no way you can do that. That would just make the house completely crumble and completely cave in. There's no amount of extra things that you can do with that. You're constantly trying to, let's say you lived in that house, unfortunately, you'd constantly having to be going outside, trying to patch this crack, trying to push some dirt under there. This is exactly what it looks like when there's no data engineering team. And you may be seeing this already in your organization of, hey, our data scientists spend 90% of their time, 50% of their time trying to patch the cracks of their terrible technical debt. Well, the data science team creates this technical debt. The data science team often furthers this technical debt. And what we have to do is we have to put data engineers in place to fix that technical debt. And this will be a long process to fix. So let's talk about what happens when we don't have operations. So here we can see in this picture, yes, there's a house. And somebody could live there if they really wanted to. It's not crumbling, but it is so ugly, so neglected, so messy, so unkempt. It's been abandoned. And it's kind of creepy, to be honest. But I love this picture, even though it's kind of creepy. So without operations, this is exactly what happens. You can have the best models in place. You can have the best data engineering in place. But if you don't have an operations team there with the care and feeding and making sure that things are running well, things are updated, the business can never rely on it. And this is exactly what I see. If I talk to the business and they say, oh yeah, we'd love to use models, we'd love to do this, but we can never rely on it, that is exactly what is happening. There is either no operations team, there's not a strong enough operations team. And then what happens is that the house eventually gets abandoned because the business cannot rely on it. And if you don't have an operations team constantly making sure it's up, constantly making sure it's running, the business cannot rely on it. They can't use it, and they'll start to use something else. So what are the implications of all this? Let's talk about those. So what's really important for us to do is to put the effort into a solid foundation initially. And I have a picture here. As you look at that picture, you can see that there's a lot of money and a lot of time going into this foundation. It's because there's going to be a really tall building put there. There's probably millions of dollars in concrete there, millions of dollars in time. If you're really sharp-eyed, you can see all the rebar sticking up. Somebody is putting a ton of time and money into this. And it's because they're going to build a tall building. They're going to build maybe 50 stories. I don't know. But it's going to be tall enough to where we have to have a really, really solid foundation in place before we can start building on that. Now, or else. So what happens if we don't build a solid foundation? So it is incredibly more money to fix it later. And here's an example. So you might have heard of the Millennium Tower in San Francisco. And just to help you, if you may not be familiar with it, I've got some screenshots of headlines. So the tower itself costs $750 million US, but it's tilting. There's a problem with the foundation. They didn't do enough. They didn't engineer it well enough. No, there's lots of finger pointing of whose problem it is or whose fault it is, because this is going to be a very expensive lawsuit. But here's the problem. All these people who are there, in essence, the business, they're the ones who are stuck with this bill. And so they're suing each other. So the homeowners, as you can see, they're suing for $200 million. So there's that. And then it's going to cost $100 million to fix it. So it's going to be incredibly expensive for them to fix this problem. But had they built a solid foundation, done the foundation correctly, yeah, we wouldn't have had this problem. Oh, and by the way, if you're from San Francisco, this is actually the picture of their foundation, them pouring the foundation. So it really is important. As you see the building being built, yeah, there's some problems. There's some major problems where you may be seeing this metaphorically in your organization of, yeah, we built this data team, but we didn't build it right. We're going to have to fix it later. It's a big problem. So what does it look like when this happens? Maybe right in the middle of this, and I want to show you, and you'll probably, if you are experiencing this, it'll probably set some things, connect some dots for you. So here I have a graph of comparing a team with a solid foundation versus a team lacking a foundation. So what we can see in this diagram, this chart, is that when we have continuous improvements and we build on a solid foundation, we're able to leverage what we did before to get to that next step. So here we have in blue those teams with a solid foundation, and here we have teams in red lacking that foundation. And what happens with those teams without a foundation is that they'll ramp up, get to a point, hit this barrier, and that barrier could be teams, it could be technical, it could be lots of things, and they just nosedive again in any productivity, and then in any velocity. Then they get themselves together, pick themselves back up, gradually ramp up again, and then just crash down. It's this boom bust cycle. They can never get things done. They can never leverage things. And it's because they don't have a foundation to do it right. So this is a key thing I want you to take out of this. This foundation, if you lack it, this is what will happen. And you're probably seeing this boom bust. We get to this point and we just crash. Now we look at that team with a solid foundation, we can see that they build on that. They get to the next level. They may plateau, and that's completely okay. They'll plateau for a bit and then build on to the next, get some more velocity, get on to the next. Now, those of you, you're probably familiar with analytics and looking at this. So although if you just, maybe a cursory person looks at this and says, hey, that lacking foundation isn't so bad. You get some productivity. But if you compare the areas of these two, the velocities of these two, how it's consistent, the team with that solid foundation is so much more productive than the other one. I wish I would have done some kind of calculation of area, but yeah. We're not talking about a 1x, a 2x. We're talking about, I've seen between 5 and 10x difference in consistency, in velocity, in productivity by having that solid foundation there. And as I've worked with clients in the past, they've been able to see that, where we've actually transformed them from that lacking foundation, that boom bust, to getting them that solid foundation, and they're building on that. So one thing that you may be thinking of, okay, I can't build it. It's already been built. How do I fix it? So what I want you to take out of this is an ounce of prevention is worth a ton of cure on this. If you're just starting out, please do yourself a big favor, build yourself that solid foundation, do it right. However, if you're in this and you're trying to fix things, it's always possible to fix it. However, you're going to have to do exactly in this picture. You're probably going to have to take a jackhammer, break down your foundation, and rebuild it. And that rebuilding could be new members of the team, mentoring, help. There's a lot of things that can get you there, but I want you to know it is possible to do it. It's just going to be costly. And then if you think that as you're sitting there thinking, okay, I hear you, I think this will fix itself, wrong. I have not seen a team actually go back and fix itself. So do be careful there. Do put the effort into this. This is exactly what you want to do. So with that, I'd be remiss in not talking about my book that he just mentioned. I just wrote a book called Data Teams. In Data Teams, I talk about what are all these three teams in much more depth. I talk about how some of the things I'm most proud of is this isn't a book about just solely about the technical side of things or the technical team side of things. A good portion of the book is about how do data teams interact with the business. And this is key. This is another part. The data teams have to interact correctly with a business to create value, to have somebody live there. And another part that I'm really proud of is the interviews. I did pretty extensive interviews with companies and people who've been doing this for a while to ask them, okay, what happened? What value did you get? How did you achieve that? So that you can read that and learn more about from their experience. So with that, I'd like to thank you, and I want to open it up for questions. So please ask your questions, and I'd love to answer them for you.
So,
Hi, Jesse. This is Ulas.
Let's go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Jesse. This is Ulas.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. You talked about three pillars of a team, of a data team. One was data engineer. Second was the operations team. I just missed the third one. What was that? And I was not able to see. Yeah.
Data science. So data science, data engineering, and operations.
So how you do differ between data engineer and a data science, these two teams?
Sure. So my definition of a data engineer is a software engineer who specializes their skills in big data. And a data scientist is somebody who's taken their mathematical background and has learned some programming and applies that to real world business problems.
Okay.
Now I could go far deeper in that, but is that if you'd like a follow-on question, please.
Yeah, so I think that's a kind of intersection between. So these two things are not exclusive, right? So these two sets are not exclusive. There is an intersection between these two sets, data science and data engineering.
There's not one of the issues we saw early on, or I saw early on with people's work, was they were thinking it as, here's this intersection where there's a huge amount of overlap, where it was kind of this Venn diagram where massive overlap. The amount of overlap between the two teams is, yeah, they're both using data systems, big data, for example, but the amount of overlap is pretty minimal. That we do need two different people, and these two different people have very different skill sets. Where you heard me talk about data scientists having some programming background. Well, the issue is that programming background is usually pretty minimal. Like if they're coming out of school, they may have had 1 or 2 semesters or be self-taught. There's a lack of experience there. Whereas that software engineer in the data engineering team has a significant amount of software engineering experience. And so they're able to create the right systems for that. So to kind of talk about it from more of an analytics perspective, we're not really expecting the data engineers to do much analytics. Maybe they'll do a simple report, but we're looking for the data scientists to be the ones doing that advanced analytics. Is that helpful?
Yeah, very much. Thanks, Jesse.
No problem.
So on the org structure, Jesse, where do you think? What's your views on staffing these roles? In which is it? Do you think it should be part of IT, or do you think it should be part of this CDO, or is it part of the business? Where do you think these people should be sitting?
Sure. I actually have some consideration of that in the book. I actually went through and gave several different titles, the pros and cons to the teams being under that title, as well as in the interviews, people share their views as well. So there's a few different things. What I came out of this in my research and talking to, and even in my own practice, I think the ideal is to having a CDO, simply because with that CDO, we would have all of our KPIs or whatever organizational objectives to be aligned. So the issue there is if data scientist is in an analytics org and data engineering is under an IT, their key objectives could be at odds with each other. So instead of forming that symbiotic relationship, their bonus structure, let's say, is tied to something that is completely different than what the data scientists need. So by bringing it under organizationally under that CDO, now we can have a straight down the line look of very well aligned objectives so that we can gain that velocity. One other thing that I often see is as an issue is how far up the organization do we have to go to if data engineering says no and data science says yes, I need this, how far up your organization do they have to go before there's a common VP to break that stalemate? And if you're going all the way up to the CEO, let's say maybe a SVP level person or a VP level person, that's going to be a lot of friction along the way. It's going to be, you're not going to be as productive. So what I'd be looking at in organizations is how often do we have to do this? How big of a pain is it to get a decision? And then, but definitely I came away with thinking CDO, perhaps chief analytics officer, that's another one. I see them kind of in similar veins, where by having that CAO, that CDO, we're able to very tightly align objectives all the way down and get people really working together well.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Yeah, I love your perspectives. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. So I guess nobody has asked a question in the chat. I'd love to see what everybody's questions are. Or if either of you have another question while we're waiting.
So these days there have been, oh, I see some questions from Mayank.
Okay, so they ask, what are some common challenges, data challenges that clients have? Sometimes when we come in and work with a company, they think that they have technical challenges. Hadoop isn't working, Spark isn't working. The issue there is that they don't realize that their challenges are actually, they're manifesting on the surface as a technical issue, but underneath that, we lack the foundation. So we have the wrong person doing something that manifests as a technical problem. So that could be, hey, our data scientists aren't able to do Spark very well. Well, and we lack a data engineering team. So it sounds like Spark's the problem, but the reality is that it's an organizational problem of we don't have data engineers. So that's a common issue that I see, common challenge. Another one is a lack of understanding from the C-level of what has to happen. So what's often happened with that C-level is that they've really heard that data science, rah, rah, rah speech. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what they didn't hear is, now here's the effort that goes into making that happen. So what will often happen is you'll get a mandate, sometimes a C-level mandate. I want data science, but they don't explicitly say, I want data science, I want operations and data engineering. So it's up to you as managers, or perhaps even as individual contributors, to go back up and say, yes, we will do data science, but we have to do these other things as well. And that's part of that education that will probably have to come from your middle management, your director level, that sort of thing, to educate that C-level of, yes, we're going to do data science, but we need to do this, this, and this first in order to be successful. If there's even more challenges, what I did in the book, another part that I'm proud of in the book, was this chapter that was called troubleshooting. It's basically troubleshooting your team. So I went through my mental Rolodex of all the problems, the most common problems I'd seen, and I wrote down these were the most common ways that I've seen them, or the common source of the issues. Now, the most difficult ones will actually be when you have several problems all at once, and to be able to pick out all of the problems all at once, to be able to attack them. Because sometimes what will happen is, yeah, you'll see there's this problem, and then you fix that and think, I fixed that. Why are there still these other problems? It was because it was a multi-problem. There were multiple problems that all have to be fixed, and you're just attacking one of those. So So Suman has a question. What is your perspective on the ratio of resources, data scientists to data engineers, and to operations? So I'll answer the operations question first. There really isn't a ratio I've seen on operations. It usually comes down to how difficult your software is to maintain, how complex it is, quite honestly, how good of a job your data scientists did, and how good of a job your data engineers did on the engineering side. So if you're faced with an operational nightmare, guess what? Your ratio is going to be higher. And I haven't seen a ratio like a headcount ratio of we need one operations person to this many. It's much more around how much software do we have out there? How difficult is said software? Now, the ratio on the data scientists, data engineers, I do have more experience to share on that. And that is, yeah, and I talk about this in the book as well, is when we have a ratio, skewed ratios will give you some really big problems. So one ratio is one data scientist to zero data engineers. That is unfortunately a common ratio right now. That means that the company has no data engineers. That's a big problem. That's a recipe for a lot of technical debt. It's not fun. Trust me, I've went through companies with it. It takes a long time to pay down. Then we have other companies where they're doing a ratio of 5 data scientists to 1 data engineer. That's a skewed ratio. And the reason for that is data scientists are not doing the majority of the work. The majority of the work is on other things for modeling. There's another paper from Google talking about this. It's called Hidden Technical Debt in Machine Learning. And so they have all these boxes, and machine learning is a pretty small box. All the other boxes, the data engineering boxes, are much bigger. So leading to that, then the ratio I've come to is 1 data scientist to 2 to 5 data engineers. So there are more data engineers than data scientists, simply because the technical, operational, the infrastructure sort of things are the bigger problems, and the model creation is a smaller problem time-wise. Not value-wise, just straight time-wise. So I want you to understand that. Now I came to that number. That's a common question of how I came to that number. This is from experience. I also talk to a lot of people who run data teams, and that's the number that they have. Probably a bare minimum there is a 1-to-1 ratio. Otherwise, you will hit some pretty difficult technical debt issues. So the next one they ask is, does this ratio depend on the complexity of the project? Yeah, that's really where that 2 to 5 comes in. If we're on a super complex project, usually the complexity doesn't manifest in the data science side. There may be the math behind the model creation, that may be complex unto itself. But if you just look at the time, the manifestation of time to complexity, that's where you get that 2 to 5. So if you have a really complex project, more than likely that's going to manifest out as a lot of data engineering work. And that's when you're on the high side of that ratio. All right, I don't see another question. You got another question? Were there any other questions? Ratio, no.
Good. So, Jesse, since looks like people are good with your presentation, thank you once again, Jesse, for your wonderful presentation. So, if you don't mind, is it possible for you to take a group picture with the attendees?
Sure, happy to.
So for the team, if you are okay with your picture, please turn your camera on, or else leave it off as it is. So if you're okay, please turn your camera on. So Ullas will take a picture. Ullas will wait for another 10 seconds for everybody to turn, or at least make sure that they're. Oh, Mayank, you had a good haircut, I believe. Okay, good.
You're on mute, Mayank.
Mayank, you are mute. You are muted.
Oh, sorry. My wife gets
Okay.
a haircut.
Yeah. Okay. So, Vilas, I think people are good. So you can take a
Yeah.
screenshot. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Jesse, thank you once again for your time, and for everybody, thanks for attending. So Pavana or Aman will send the Zoom recording details for you to have a look at it. And so keep, so we, as you know, this webinar is on the third Thursday of every month. So it's a free webinar. So we have experts such as Jesse, people of Jesse's caliber coming and speaking to us. So the next Tuesday's presentation is going to be on data and analytics ethics, where we have Akili coming and talking to us. Akili is an industry veteran. He's a consultant. He sits on the analytics advisory board of Queen's University. So he's a pretty much an accomplished analytics leader. So he's going to talk about data and analytics ethics. That's going to be an interesting topic. Please keep follow the LinkedIn page of DBP and see what's happening on the webinars and everything. And take care. Stay positive. Test negative, and see you soon.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.